So I've put on this silly hat, as you can see, and I'm coming to you from an undisclosed location because I have some very unfortunate news. I have come across an indie book that I can't actually, in good conscience, recommend to readers and watchers of Indie Book Club, and that happens to be the entry for May. In the world of indie books, you are probably going to come across one or two, or more than one or two, that maybe just aren't that great, that you don't like, that have some issues. On the other hand, you know, I set this lineup and I'm gonna stick to it. So it puts me in a very weird position because I'm very much a subscriber to the wisdom that if you don't have anything nice to say, you shouldn't say anything at all. And if you're a writer, you should try not to say anything bad about another writer. But I don't really have that option, so I'm gonna kind of try to do this as best I can, and we'll see where we go. The book for May, I'm not actually going to say the name of it because this is a video and I don't want to run the risk. Maybe it's not a real risk, but video tends to show up at the top of search results and I don't want it to be the first thing you see, especially because the nature of indie books is such that if you're watching this, you know, down the road sometime, well after the actual date of review, it's very possible that the writer was able to upload a new copy, and, you know, if they decided to take this critique that I'm about to do seriously, and this could all be a non-issue. So this is going to be Book X. If you've watched the 2021 book announcement or last month's indie book review where I say what book I'm reviewing in May, you're going to know the name of it. And if you want to know the name of it, go back and watch that stuff. But for this review, I'm not going to say the name at all. But I am going to give a book summary like I always do. In a post-pandemic, post-war, post-complete societal meltdown society, teen gang leaders Sarah and Maria struggle with their feelings for each other while uncovering a major secret in their family histories. This book was billed as post-apocalyptic LGBTQ romance, which when I read that, I was like, hey, that sounds great. I'll read that. And there are several things that I think from a conceptual standpoint, this book really did have going for it. So instead of, kind of giving the list of why you should read this book, I'm kind of morphing this into why you would want to read this book if maybe the execution was a little bit better. Number one, pandemic as a major plot point. As I said in the summary, this is a post-apocalyptic book, so this is way down the road. The pandemic is over, and in fact, it kind of seems like there have been other pandemics since then, little smaller ones. But this was the first book where the pandemic served like as a historical marker. And it served as a catalyst, I think, for some of the events that actually happen in the book, which is also a cool idea, that the pandemic, changes things hundreds of years from now, which of course it is going to. I expect I'll see more of that in indie books and traditionally published books going forward, but this being the first one I saw means it's probably one of the first ones to do it, and that deserves mention, I think. Number two, corporations as government. I think something that really did present itself during this 2020 pandemic and 2020 and beyond pandemic that maybe I hadn't thought about before was the role that corporations really play in our lives, like their oversized role. And this book does a thing where after enough time, corporations have actually taken over full cities. They've taken on the role of a government that was too weak to handle the problems, and the corporations came in and took over where the governments were failing, and that is where they now stand. This is something that happens in the Mad Adams series by Margaret Atwood. You see it in the first book of that, which I am blanking on the name. In any case, that does a very similar thing. This, however, tying it specifically to an event that I and modern readers have lived through, that makes it even more terrifying. I live in Nevada, as most of you should be aware by now. But one of the things that Nevada's been talking about doing lately, and you can look this up, this is real, corporations, I think of a certain size, need to spend a certain amount of money to basically buy land and turn it into a city. But it's a little creepy, and it raises a lot of questions, like, how would a corporation run a city? I assume they would be really bad at it, you know? Like, are they going to have their own courts? Are they going to have their own police force? Like, it's a lot of those sorts of things. And that's, like, a real thing that's happening right now. Like, I don't think it's actually been approved, but, like, it's on the table. These things are possible. And that is just so cool that this book incorporated that sort of thing. Number 3, Alienesque interpersonal dynamics. When you think about it, 100 to 200 years in the future or more, we're probably not going to recognize, like, how people interact with each other. Like, think about the differences of how people interact with each other just from, like, 1950s to now. The way parental-child relationships have changed. It's almost unrecognizable. It's not completely unrecognizable, but it's very different. And this book kind of has a little bit of that, with the main relationships between the mothers and their daughters. Sarah and Maria are the daughters, obviously the teenage girls, and they spend quite a bit of time talking to their mothers about various things. For example, the 2 girls, they're in a gang. They're in a street gang, which is, if I'm understanding the book right, the only kind of alternative to working for one of the corporation's city-states. The operations of the gang and, like, what they're doing, the girls discuss this very openly with their mothers. It's not, like, taboo, the way you probably wouldn't talk about being in a street gang now with your parents. You know, that's kind of something that's done under the table. Another example is the sex lives. They get not super explicit, but certainly more explicit than is probably standard right now. Not being a mother myself, I'm not sure, but it felt a little bit like this does not feel like a mother-daughter conversation. This feels like something else. It's sort of mother-daughtery. The moms are trying to give advice, but just the way the information is portrayed and the type of information that's portrayed, it just feels very alien. It feels like almost human, but not quite, which you can read as either very awkward, which it is at times, or you can read it as an artistic choice, which I wanted to read it as an artistic choice, so that's what I did. And I think it makes sense for a book like this. Okay, here we go. Despite everything I just said, all of the really interesting set pieces and concepts that are happening in this book, I have to talk about why I can't actually recommend this book. So I'm just going to kind of do this from beginning to end as best I can, because it really is not a problem with the world building. I don't even know if it's necessarily a problem with characters. It is 100% a plot and pacing issue. This book is 300 pages long. And for the first 150 pages, 95% of it is the 2 main characters, Sarah and Maria, speaking to their mothers in their separate apartments. And that's it. Like, that's literally 150 pages of the book is conversations between 2 women, 2 pairs of women. And not only that, but the conversations are pretty much about the same thing. Sarah is in love with Maria, but doesn't think that she can be with her, and Maria is in love with Sarah, but also has a reason for not being with her. It all feels very circular. It all feels like there are obstacles being put in place when there weren't any. There's a lot of discussion made about something of a romantic moment that may have happened over 4th of July, which was a couple of months ago in the book, and that it was awkward and that maybe it was misunderstood, but the problem is, like, both people are saying it was awkward, but then also they're saying, like, I don't know if She knows that I love her, even though I tried to kiss her. And I don't know if she wants to be with me, even though she's mad at me because I haven't spoken to her since we tried to kiss. The other problem is that for a book to call itself a romance, to not have those characters meet for 150 pages, to not have them interact at all, I don't know why. There's no reason. Like, they're not in a shelter-in-place order. They're not... he kind of tries to explain it by saying that Sarah is grounded, but it's also, like, so what? Like, it's not, like, a police state where she's grounded. It's just her mom. You're basically left with 150 pages of conversation about the same thing, just going kind of round and round in circles. I've never read a book where, like, I was literally like, if this conversation goes on for one more page, I'm gonna rip my eyes out. Like, I've never felt that way about a book before. And I guess the only thing I can really say that's positive about those 150 pages is, one, it's just like a head trip. Like, if you want to have like a viscerally negative reaction to a book, you gotta read this thing. And by the time it ended, I was almost hysterical. Like, I didn't read it in one sitting. I couldn't. I had to walk away. But, like, by the time it ended, I was literally just like, this is so unpleasant. I don't know what else to do. And then it hit me. I was sort of like, I don't know if this is intentional, and I certainly wouldn't recommend anyone else try doing this, but it seems like that experience, that 150-page experience, was like getting a full-on blast of quarantine brain right in your face. Like, 50 years from now, or even just a couple years from now, anyone who doesn't remember what it was like to shelter in place, or for some reason, missed it, they can read this book and they'll know exactly what it felt like. It's just, you're going in circles, you're just talking, nothing's happening. It's just like, why? I need to see interactions between more people than just these two. I need something to go on. I need a plot. And it was the closest thing to a literary depiction of the quarantine that I'm probably ever going to see. I don't want to see anymore. And I think if that was done to affect something in the plot, I think that would have been brilliant. It didn't. I think it was just bad plot. The other thing about the conversations is they're really awkward to read. The phrasing is just a little bit off. The punctuation is even a little off. Like, there's dashes used instead of commas. The best way for me to describe it is, if you've seen The Room, the movie, I think we all know what The Room is. If you've seen The Room, it's like that. It's like watching a movie or reading a book that was written by an alien who kind of has been studying humans, but is still not really totally clear on how everything goes together, and like what action A would be followed by with reaction B. It's very weird. If it wasn't dystopian, I think I would have been even... I don't know if I would have finished reading it, but because it's dystopian, I think it gets away with it a little. It just might have been too much. So 50% of the book goes by, and there's a lot of talk and a lot of circling, and finally both pairs of women get to the conclusion that the two girls need to talk to each other. Sorry, like, I can't even... It's just, I'm remembering it. I'm, like, reliving it. But it's just, like, you're screaming at the book. We're just like, I knew that freaking 100 pages ago. Like, what the hell took you so long? So finally they get there, and they're like, you guys need to have dinner and chat with each other. The grounding thing, that's over. We're just kind of throwing that out the window. And they finally meet. With the moms there. Like, they go on a date together, the two girls, but the mothers are kind of there, like, at the restaurant, sitting in the corner. I don't know. Maybe it's a future thing. I'm not sure. If the first half of the book had been used to elicit sexual frustration and anticipation somehow, again, I don't know how you do that when you don't have your characters meeting until the middle of the book, but if it had somehow managed to elicit that instead of this, again, well-rendered claustrophobic quarantine feeling, that might have been a great way to subvert the genre. Instead, it did the claustrophobia thing. By the time they met, I was like, great, let's just kind of move this along. Maybe we can finally get back to something that resembles a book here. And then after they meet, the story takes a turn that I can only describe as batshit crazy. Like, it's so good and so weird and so out of left field that, like, it almost makes the 150 pages of madness-inducing circular talking worth it. Almost. If you don't know what to expect and you make it to that point and you see, I don't know if I even want to tell you what it is because it's so ridiculous. Okay, so I will tell you. Basically, these two girls who've been hemming and hawing and being like, I don't know if I love her, I don't know if she loves me, I don't know how to tell her, I don't know how to talk to her, blah, 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 blah. They've been doing this for 150 pages. All of a sudden they get together and with almost no conversation, they are engaging in the most purposefully awkward BDSM sex, attempted sex. They don't even have sex because they're so awkward they fail at it. It's just like, what? And there's this thing about, like, they're at Sarah's house, but Maria left her, like, dominatrix outfit in Sarah's closet or something, and it's just like, when did that happen? And where did this come from? And I've had no indication that either of you are into this. And then that's like a good, I don't know, I would say about 20-ish%, the next like 20-ish% of the book is kind of that. It's more attempted sex, more attempted romance, all of it very kind of awkward. Moments where their moms kind of walk in on them or allude to the fact that they know what they're doing, which again is just sort of like, what world are we living in? How did we get to this point? Like, what was the, you know, evolution of mother-daughter relationships that I'm not familiar with right now? It was almost worth losing my mind for the first 150 pages, but not quite. It was kind of like a consolation prize. Like, oh, you got through that. We'll give you something sort of nice right here, something entertaining. And then for the last 25 to 30% of the book, we go back to these kitchen conversations between the daughters and the mothers. However, now they're switching apartments. They're talking to each other, which is progress. And it's not about, does she love me anymore? It's about, Sarah is a secret Romanoff heiress, and she's been, you know, mind wiped, or she doesn't remember, she's been adopted. There was some reason why she doesn't know this. And Maria is her, like, secret servant or her protector, and they're part of this shadow government, and they need to, you know, overthrow the corporations that have taken over the world, and all of this. There was almost no indication that any of this was happening. You kind of got here and there, it was mentioned in the first 150 pages of table conversations that maybe there was something weird going on with the mothers, but it was mostly like they used to run the gangs and now the daughters do. I don't know, but that comes up. So something about shadow government and these girls being a part of it, and now there might be some conflict as to whether or not, some question as to whether or not they can be in a relationship because of their shadow government things. Sarah, I think, needs to marry a man who she doesn't love. I think he's the head of the rival gang. She has to marry him, although it's unclear why that's the case. And then the book just kind of stops. It is a duet. The book is packaged as a duet, the first in a duet, so I'm guessing it was just setting it up for the sequel. I would be really hard-pressed to tell you what the resolution was. I would be hard-pressed to tell you what the conflict really was, because for 150 pages, going back and forth between the two girls talking to each other, or about each other, rather, sorry, not to each other, there doesn't really seem to be, they seem to be very much on the same page the whole time. They're just not talking to each other. That is confirmed when they start engaging in a type of sex that is very much based on a deep level of trust just out of the blue. So they must have some kind of understanding between each other, some deeper understanding that did not require so much time spent hemming and hawing over does she or does she not. And then we sort of go off into this political thriller type thing, which I'm not really sure where that's going. Like I said, I assume it's going into the next book, but I'm unlikely to read it at this point. In the end, Book X by author not gonna say has a lot of really good concepts going for it, and set itself up to be a really good dystopian romance, or just a dystopian book if it was going to go for the shadow government thing. But the execution of it just doesn't work. There's just a lot of pretty basic kind of oversights here, you know. It's a lot of telling and not showing. It's a lot of conversations when there could be action. There's a lot of, as you know, Bob conversations where you've got people basically talking about stuff that both parties already know, and they're just talking to each other for the benefit of the audience, what benefit there is. There's no stakes. There's no urgency. It's just people living their lives, which for a book that was written about, and I believe during a good part of the pandemic, makes total sense. But I lived through the pandemic. I don't really want to read a book that puts me right back in that situation. You know, as I've been talking about this, there is, I think, an audience for this book. And that is the audience of people who really want that visceral connection to a book. It's not a fun, visceral reaction, but there is one. It's certainly not for the faint-hearted, and you won't get it unless you really push yourself to finish it. If I'm going to be honest with you, if I hadn't been reviewing this book, I don't know if I would have made it through. I may have quit about, I don't even know how far in, but I don't think I would have made it to the 150-page mark. Am I glad I made it? Yes, in that I'm glad that the book was not 300 pages worth of conversations, that there was a little bit of action happening. It's something interesting to talk about, and there's a lot to learn from it. So in that sense, it's very rewarding. And it's certainly, like, as a writer, it helps me kind of spot where previous drafts of my own work have absolutely fallen into some of these traps, and I can be like, oh, I can see why a reviewer, a beta reader, or even an agent said this doesn't work. It really is some interesting concepts in this book, and I would love to see those concepts reworked, the plot redone to be a little bit more, moving. Basically, the plot added. I would love to see a plot added to this book. And I think it could be really, really good at some point. That point just isn't right now, though. I feel really bad. God, I hate this. I'm so bad at doing these things. The hat helps. It does help. A little. I hope it helped you get through this very depressing and very not fun review. I will say this, at some point in the future, if this book is redone, I'll give it a chance, and if it's improved, I'll come back on here and we'll do another review. I really do hope that this book sees another life, because I do think it has some great stuff available to it. It just needs a plot. Thank you all so much for sticking with me through this difficult review. Hopefully I won't have to do another one, fingers crossed. This is what I get for creating a list before I read the books, but that's why we're here, you know. Readers take chances. I'm going to take chances. I'm not going to, just review the ones I say I'm going to read and give them 5 stars and move on. If I see a problem, I'm going to say it. So this is the risk we take as reviewers and as writers and as readers. We're all taking risks here. So I hope it was helpful. Next month's book will be what is it? Oh, it's our double feature. We're doing a fairy tale fantasy double feature featuring Deja Vu, The Realm Surfer, and Matriarch. As I said, they're both fairy tale fantasies, so we're going to be doing a little compare-contrast about what makes a fairy tale. As always, please like and subscribe to the channel. Go follow us on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, wherever you get your social media fun. I hope you all have a great May. I hope you have a great rest of your spring, and we will see you next month. Put on a silly hat. It helps.